And what exactly is Trump demanding from the Iranian government at this point?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, talking to folks inside Iran and outside, many were waiting for President Trump to take action against the Islamic Republic. He even went as far as saying help is on the way and encouraged thousands of people to continue protesting. And many of those people, as you said, were killed. And the death toll is still unknown to most independent journalists and even human rights watchers. So it was a very interesting move by the president to say something like that at such a heightened tension inside Iran. But in recent weeks, he has taken on that focus on the protesters and shifted it, zoomed out to the 30,000-foot view of the nuclear program.
There is a night that most people will never hear about, not because it didn't matter, because the people who decide what you hear chose not to tell you. It happened in Iran, multiple cities, simultaneous blasts, and within hours, the Iranian government had already sealed the story as gas leaks, they said. Gas leaks in multiple cities at the same time in the dead of night. The kind of coincidence that under any other circumstance would be laughed out of any room in the world. But this is Iran. And in Iran, the government does not explain itself. It dictates. It tells you what happened. And if you question it, the questioning stops, not the narrative. So within hours, the story was locked.
And obviously the government of Iran not being straightforward about what were the causes of these incidents. And so, everyone is watching to see if these incidents are directly related to the threats that the U.S. has made against Iran in recent weeks, and whether or not it's a warning, it's a strategic, symbolic move, or it's going to become an all-out war. And
gas leaks, nothing more. Move along. But here is the thing. The intelligence agencies in Washington and Tel Aviv didn't buy it, not for a second. And the whispers that started circulating through those halls told a very different story, that these explosions were not accidents at all, but a targeted operation, possibly an assassination attempt on a high-ranking Iranian naval commander, a claim Iran denied immediately, categorically, without hesitation, without a single detail to back up their version of events. And both the US and Israel officially said they had nothing to do with it, officially. But we are not living in a world of official statements right now. We are living in a world where one unclaimed incident, one misstep, one spark could set the entire Middle East on fire. And when I say on fire, I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean the kind of fire that changes oil prices overnight. The kind that shuts down shipping routes that half the global economy depends on. The kind that sends shockwaves through every stock market on the planet before the sun even rises. The kind that rewrites alliances, destabilizes governments, and forces countries that have stayed neutral for decades to pick a side. The kind of fire that ordinary people who have never set foot in a war zone, never made a single decision that affected another nation, suddenly find themselves living inside of. This is not just Iran versus America. This is the night the world could change, and almost nobody is paying attention. So let's pay attention. To understand how dangerous this moment actually is, you have to understand what is happening inside Iran right now. Because the explosions are only half the story. The other half is happening on the streets, and it has been happening for months. For months, the Iranian people have been rising up, protests, chanting, demanding change from a regime that has ruled through fear for over 4 decades. Not a small demonstration here and there. Not isolated incidents that can be dismissed. Widespread, sustained, defiant. The kind of movement that, in any other country, would force a government to its knees within weeks. But this is not any other country. And the regime's response has not been measured or cautious or even strategic in any way that suggests concern for its own image. It has been brutal, unambiguously brutal. Activists on the ground, the ones brave enough to still be documenting what is happening, are reporting that thousands of people have been killed. Thousands, not injured, not detained, killed. And here is the part that makes it worse. The actual number is unknown, because the Iranian government controls the information. They control what journalists can report. They control what reaches the outside world. They control the narrative the same way they controlled the narrative about those explosions. Tightly, completely. So the real death toll could be higher, much higher, and the international community is watching. But watching is not the same as acting. Watching is the easiest thing in the world to do. It requires nothing. It costs nothing. It changes nothing. It simply allows the people doing the watching to feel like they are doing something without ever having to face what doing something actually requires. Now, among those people on the streets, there are faces we will never see on international television. There is a 22-year-old student in Tehran who walked out of his university not because someone told him to, not because he saw a social media post and felt inspired for an afternoon, but because he watched his neighbor get dragged away in the middle of the night and never come back. No explanation, no charges, no phone call. No news, just gone. And this student decided that staying quiet, the thing his parents taught him to do, the thing that kept his family safe for years, was no longer something he could live with. There is a factory worker in Isfahan who has not seen a full paycheck in 3 months, who watched her daughter cry from hunger one evening and looked around the room and realized, this is what the regime has built. This is what 40 years of this system has actually produced. Not prosperity, not stability, hunger. And she decided that the fear, the deep generational fear that has kept millions silent, was no longer enough to keep her quiet. These are not statistics. These are people, real people, making real decisions, under real and immediate danger. And the regime is treating them like a problem to be managed with force, with silence, with the kind of control that says, if you cannot be heard, you cannot fight. If you cannot be seen, you do not exist. President Trump, at the height of these protests, took a very public stand. He addressed the Iranian people directly. Help is on the way. Those 4 words traveled across every platform, every screen, every phone in Iran that could still access the outside world. And for a while, that message did something powerful. It gave people on the ground a reason to keep going. It gave them hope that the outside world was watching, that someone somewhere with real power was paying attention to them, not just to their country, not just to the strategic value of their region, to them as people. But something shifted, and that shift is where this story gets complicated, because the focus coming out of Washington has changed. The protests are still happening. People are still dying on those streets, but the headlines have moved. The rhetoric has moved. The cameras have moved. And if you pay close attention, really close attention, you will notice that the conversation is no longer about the people of Iran. It is about what is underneath the ground in Iran, the nuclear program. The U.S. has been accusing Iran of trying to build a nuclear bomb for years. This is not a new accusation. This is not something invented by one administration or one party. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have raised this alarm again and again because the intelligence suggests that Iran's nuclear ambitions go far beyond what any peaceful energy program requires. And Iran has consistently denied it, saying their nuclear activities are purely for peaceful purposes, that they have every right to enrich uranium, that the international community is applying a double standard that it would never apply to other nations. But the U.S. is not convinced. And right now, President Trump has signaled that his #1 goal, his singular top priority, everything else is secondary objective, is to reach a deal that reduces the nuclear threat. A deal, not a war. At least that is what the words say. Here's where it gets strange. Both sides say they want a deal. Trump has said it publicly, repeatedly with conviction. Iranian officials have echoed the same language in different words, but with the same implied meaning. On paper, this should be a moment of genuine possibility, a window, an opening that both sides could walk through together. But at the exact same time, both sides are signaling that they are ready to fight if that deal falls apart. Ready to fight. Not posturing for cameras, not sending mixed signals to keep the other side guessing. Ready. Genuinely, militarily, strategically ready. This creates a paradox that is almost impossible to navigate. 2 governments saying we want peace while simultaneously preparing for war. And the people caught in the middle, the protesters, the workers, the students on the streets of Tehran, they are not part of this negotiation at all. They never were. They were never going to be. For Washington, the protests were a moral issue, something that looked good on camera, something that could be framed as standing up for freedom, for human rights, for the universal values that America claims to champion. But the nuclear program, that is not a moral issue. That is an existential issue. That is the kind of threat that makes governments change their entire strategy overnight. The kind that makes them set aside the faces on the streets and focus entirely on the labs underground. And that is exactly what happened. The pressure moved from the streets to the labs, from human rights to warheads, from people to policy, from hope to calculation. One spark, one misstep. We will keep coming back to this because it is the truth of where we are. And the next part of this story proves exactly why those words matter more than they have in years. Go back to last June. Tensions were already running high. The rhetoric was already sharp on both sides. And then both the US and Israel struck major targets inside Iran, including nuclear facilities. This was not a rumor. This was not speculation fueled by unnamed sources. This was confirmed by multiple sources on both sides. Real strikes, real damage, real consequences for real infrastructure that took years to build. And when it happened, Iran did something that surprised a lot of people. They showed restraint. They pulled back. They absorbed the blow and did not escalate to full-scale war. At the time, many analysts read that as a sign of weakness. Iran was scared. Iran knew it could not match the combined military power of the US and Israel in a direct confrontation. Iran would think twice, 3 times before pushing back in any meaningful way. But that reading was wrong, badly wrong, because what was actually happening inside Tehran was not fear, it was not hesitation, it was a recalculation, a careful, deliberate, strategic recalculation. Iranian officials were studying what had just occurred. They were analyzing the strikes, the intelligence failures that allowed them, the regional dynamics that made them possible, the gaps in their own defense that were exposed. And they arrived at a conclusion that has fundamentally and permanently changed the dynamic of this confrontation. They decided that the era of the shadow war was over. No more incidents that nobody claims. No more strikes that go unanswered in public while quiet retaliation happens months later. No more playing a game where both sides pretend nothing is happening while the other side quietly bleeds. From this point forward, Iran has made its position absolutely clear. Any move by the US or Israel, no matter how small, no matter how carefully disguised, no matter how deniable it might appear, will be treated as an act of all-out war. And they will respond in kind, publicly, forcefully, without restraint, without deniability, without apology, without hesitation. That is not a threat made in anger or desperation. That is a policy shift made in cold, deliberate calculation. And it changes everything about how this situation can unfold in the coming days and weeks. But Iran is not the only country recalculating right now. The entire region is moving, and the moves being made behind closed doors are just as important, possibly more important, than the ones happening in the open. Think of the Middle East right now as a chessboard. Every country is a piece. Every piece is trying to figure out where to stand, which square to occupy, which side to lean toward before the board gets flipped. And the stakes are not abstract. They are immediate. They are personal. They are about the survival of governments, economies, and populations that have spent decades trying to avoid exactly this kind of chaos landing on their doorstep. Saudi Arabia's defense minister traveled to Washington, not for routine diplomacy, not for pleasantries or photo opportunities, to deliver a direct, personal, unambiguous message to U.S. officials about exactly what Saudi Arabia will and will not support in the days ahead. Qatar has dispatched officials to Tehran, not to take sides, not to show solidarity with Iran, but to try, desperately, urgently, to keep the temperature low before it reaches a point where no amount of diplomacy can bring it back down. Countries like Oman and Turkey are working behind the scenes, making calls, sending envoys, leaning on every relationship they have built over decades to prevent a war that none of them want anywhere near their borders. But here is the critical difference between this year and last year, and this is the detail that changes the entire calculation for Washington. Last June, when tensions flared, the U.S. had something it desperately needed: regional cooperation. It had airspace, it had access, it had allies willing to look the other way while operations were conducted from or through their territory. The green light, as it is sometimes called in diplomatic circles, permission, even if unspoken, to act without those allies having to publicly acknowledge what was happening. That green light is gone now, completely gone. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman have all explicitly, not implied, not suggested, not hinted at through back channels, explicitly told the U.S. that their airspace is closed. No military strikes against Iran will be launched from their territory or through their skies. The door is shut, and the reason for this cold shoulder is not ideological. It is not about sympathy for Iran or opposition to American foreign policy in principle. It is personal. It is born from direct experience. Last June, when Iran was hit, Iran retaliated, and one of those retaliatory strikes hit a target inside U.S. airspace within Qatar. It damaged infrastructure, it damaged trust, and it taught these Arab states a lesson that landed with the force of a physical blow. If you allow your territory to be used against Iran, Iran will come for you too, directly, without warning, without distinction between military and civilian targets. So now, these same countries are walking a razor's edge. They are warning Iran to be calculated in any response. Do not overreact. Do not give the U.S. a justification to escalate further. But they are simultaneously denying the U.S. the access and cooperation it needs to act without consequences. Each country is blocking a square on the board. Iran has fewer escape routes than it did last year. But the U.S. is powerful and boxed in. And that combination, overwhelming power without the room to use it freely, is one of the most dangerous and unpredictable situations in geopolitics. And that pressure does not stop at borders, it stops at water. The Strait of Hormuz. If you have heard that name before, you already know why it matters. If you haven't, understand this. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this single stretch of water every single day. 1/5. It is one of the most critical maritime choke points on the entire planet. Every tanker, every barrel, every shipment that keeps economies running, cities lit, hospitals functioning, and industries moving, a massive portion of it flows through water that is right now becoming the most watched and most dangerous stretch of ocean on Earth. The U.S. has moved significant military assets into the region, an aircraft carrier, warships, support vessels, a posture that is unmistakable. We are here, we are watching, and we are not leaving until this situation resolves. This is not at the scale of the buildup seen before the capture of Maduro in Venezuela, but it is significant, far beyond a symbolic show of force. This is a deployment meant to communicate one thing, clearly and without ambiguity. We are prepared to act, and we are prepared to act fast. Iran has responded with live-fire naval drills inside the Strait of Hormuz, not nearby. Not in adjacent waters, inside, right in the choke point itself, right where the tankers move, right where the world's energy supply passes through like blood through a vein. The message from Tehran is clear. This is our region. We control these waters. We have practiced controlling them. And if anyone tests us here, we will demonstrate exactly what that control looks like when it is no longer theoretical. The U.S. has already warned Iranian forces not to get too close to American assets during these exercises, a warning that, on its surface, sounds routine. Standard operating procedure. The kind of communication that happens between navies every day in contested waters. But in a space where ships are operating within miles of each other, where radar signals can be misread, where fog and darkness and fatigue and human error are all variables that no amount of training can fully eliminate, routine warnings are the last thing standing between the current situation and an irreversible one. Picture this. A radar operator on an Iranian vessel picks up a signal at 2 in the morning. It is ambiguous. It could be a commercial ship running slightly off course. It could be a U.S. Navy asset approaching without proper identification. The rules of engagement say to respond. A warning flare is fired. It is misinterpreted by the other side as a hostile action. A warning shot is fired in response, and within minutes, not hours, not days, not after a round of diplomatic phone calls, minutes, what started as a blip on a screen has become an incident that every news channel on the planet is covering. Every leader is being briefed. Every military in the region is going to alert status, and every calculation that kept this situation manageable is suddenly irreversibly outdated. And once that happens, once actual shots are fired in the Strait of Hormuz, the restraint that has kept this from becoming a full-scale war disappears, instantly, completely, permanently. There is no taking it back. There is no phone call that undoes it. There is no diplomatic channel that makes it as if it never happened. One spark, one misstep. We keep coming back to this, not because it is dramatic, because it is the reality of the geography, the military positioning, and the human beings operating equipment in close quarters under extreme tension, in the dark, with incomplete information and everything to lose. So where does this leave us? On one hand, you have diplomacy, real diplomacy, not just words spoken for cameras. Countries scrambling to bring both sides back to the table. 6 rounds of talks were held in Oslo last year. Serious, substantive negotiations that produced frameworks, if not final agreements. There is institutional memory of how these conversations work. There are people in every capital who understand deeply and personally that war in this region does not stay in this region. It spreads. It destabilizes economies that took decades to build. It costs lives that have nothing to do with Iran or America or nuclear weapons or naval drills or any of the geopolitical calculations being made in rooms that ordinary people will never enter. On the other hand, you have a deep and growing fear that the desire for a deal, expressed by both sides, is not genuine, that it is a tactic, a way to buy time, a way to create the appearance of good faith while quietly preparing for something else. The U.S. has used this playbook before, engaged diplomatically while building pressure militarily, hoping the other side blinks first. Iran knows this history. Iran has studied American strategy for decades, and that knowledge, that deep mistrust born from experience and memory, makes real trust almost impossible to build in the time that remains. History shows us that moments like this rarely announce themselves. The wars that reshape the world do not usually begin with a formal declaration. They do not begin with a press conference or a speech or a signed document. They begin with a miscalculation, a misunderstanding, a night where someone made a decision they cannot take back, and by the time anyone realizes what has happened, the forces that were set in motion cannot be stopped. We do not know if that night is coming, but we know the conditions are there. The military assets are in position. The rhetoric has hardened on both sides. The escape routes are narrowing. The regional allies who once provided a buffer are now drawing lines of their own. And the people who have the most to lose, Ordinary people in every country that touches this region and beyond. They are not the ones making the decisions that will determine what happens next. What happens in the next few days in the Strait of Hormuz and behind closed doors in Washington and Tehran will determine whether this moment passes quietly into history or whether it becomes the moment everything changes. Before we close, one quick clarification. Everything in this video is based on public information, historical context, and my own analysis. It is not a call to action, not an instruction, and not a claim about anyone's intentions. It is simply one perspective on a fast-changing situation. Reasonable people can see the same facts and reach different conclusions, and that is healthy. No matter where you stand, the goal should always be the same: stability, accountability, and peace, without fear or hate. You are welcome to share your own perspective in the comments, respectfully and thoughtfully. Thank you for watching and for thinking critically. Subscribe for more calm, fact-driven deep dives.